The World Boxing Organization has seen some pretty impressive talents introduced over the last few years. There's no doubt that Tim Tszyu is one of them, a fact that cannot be denied now that he's dominated the Lion of Japan, Takeshi Inoue, in the ring. But what do we really know about the fight that changed it all, and what's next for Tszyu now that he's 20-0? For all this and more, stay tuned. First things first, before the bout, anticipation was at an all-time high last Wednesday when Tim Tszyu was set to face off against Japan's own Wonder Boy, Takeshi Inoue. And while the majority of bookies still had their money on Tszyu when it came to walking away with the win, it was no doubt going to be the toughest challenge the Australian boxer would have had to deal with up to that point. His road to success has been a pretty even one after all, with Tszyu having already secured an unbeaten record of 19-0 before staring at Inoue from across the ring. And since 15 of these wins were the resultant of total knockouts, it really goes without saying that Tszyu hasn't had the hardest of opponents show up in his past. In fact, the Sydney native has almost never had to last a full 12 rounds, with many questioning what would eventually happen to his endurance if this situation eventually arose. And who would have known that it was little old Takeshi Inoue who would finally allow Tszyu to shut the critics up by dominating across each and every stage of the bout. And although the final decision painted Inoue as someone who was simply outclassed by Tszyu, the statistics of the fighter tell a different story. Remember, Inoue was at that point 17-1-1 with a grand total of 10 knockouts to his name. Not exactly what you would call a pushover or easy fight for the Australian facing off against him. Up next, the world-class domination of Inoue. But despite being one of the biggest challenges in the history of Tszyu's career, it didn't take long for the Australian to show why he's currently unbeaten in the super welterweight division. It may be true that the crowd wasn't treated as one of his infamous TKOs, but we'd argue that the fight was even better this way around. Both competitors took incredible shots at one another throughout all 12 rounds, with fans of Inoue being pretty impressed by how long he was able to last against the Sydney powerhouse. At the end of the day, Tszyu walked away with an unbeaten record of 20-0, though, with the judges deciding in his favor in a unanimous decision. Suffice to say, this was pretty much secured him a spot in the running for Brian Castaños' super welterweight title come next year, something that Tszyu has been dreaming of for quite a few years now. This also meant that the Australian was able to retain his WBO, Global and Asia Pacific super welterweight titles, which would have been lost to Inoue if the Japanese brawler had come out on top. It must, however, be said that the win by Tszyu over Inoue wasn't without controversy. Although the judges essentially decided things in his favor, there was a contentious hit that really riled the crowd up, with Inoue fans calling for sanctions against Tszyu as a resultant. That being said, sounds like the organizers are happy with how things went down. So what did Tszyu have to say about his victory over Inoue? And it looks like there's no real love lost between the Japanese and Australian fighter, who both came together after the fight to compliment the other on a bout well fought. In fact, Tszyu couldn't help himself when it came to praising Inoue for a job well done. When speaking about the tenacity of his competitor, Tszyu was heard saying that the guy is built like a brick wall. I hit him with everything I had and he wouldn't go down. I don't think a heavyweight could drop him. What a warrior. As we mentioned earlier, Inoue is one of the only contenders to ever force Tszyu into a 12-round situation, and fans of the Sydney native are incredibly proud of just how much endurance he showed during the fight. There were quite a few questions regarding his long-term performance prior to the bout, after all, and it sounds like critics are pretty much sated now that we'll no longer be writing about that obvious weakness in Tszyu's game. Actions speak louder than words after all, and as it turns out, Tszyu has more than enough action to back his performance in the ring right now. That being said, he did end up speaking out about how he was disappointed in not being able to get the knockout. In his own words, "I'll be back in the gym, as in, I need to take these guys out." Suffice to say, we have a lot to look forward to. Where to next for Tim Tszyu? Following the domination, Tim Tszyu is looking to face off against Brian Castaños in an attempt to secure the WBO belt that Castaños is currently holding. And if we were Castaños, we'd be a little bit worried. Despite not landing a knockout blow and adding to the week's highlight reel, Tszyu worked his butt off in the ring and didn't allow Inoue any space to come back with a vengeance. And while Castaños will be a much bigger threat at the end of the day, it's a dominating victory like this that's sure to motivate Tszyu to do his best in all upcoming events. The man also showcased a level of skill that isn't really seen in the super welterweight division at the moment, combining some high-impact punches with a maneuverability that makes him difficult to punch. In other words, we know that Tszyu has the ability to take on Brian Castaños and possibly walk away with a win. But does this mean that Castaños will be looking for a bout like this? Well, that's a difficult question to answer. You see, we know that Castaños wants to be the best, but at the moment, he also has the opportunity to take out Jermell Charlo, who he drew with earlier in the year. And as far as the experts are concerned, this is more than likely what we can expect in the future. That being said, there's no doubt that Tszyu will be gunning for the title soon. What if Castaños chooses to face off against Charlo instead? The team behind Tim Tszyu is pretty adamant about the contender having a fight come February or March of next year though, which isn't at all dependent on the availability of Castaños. According to an official spokesperson for his brand, Tszyu will be fighting early next year despite the possibility of Castaños instead choosing to face off against Jermell Charlo. In fact, it might even be better for Tszyu if this is the case. As we mentioned earlier, the man doesn't usually go 12 rounds, so it goes without saying that he's going to need more than a few months to recover from the dominating performance he put in against Inoue. That being said, there's also been some talk as to where his next fight will take place. Since the Inoue bout was at home for Tszyu, experts have been expecting the future fight against Castaños to be overseas. He's Argentinian after all, but funny enough, the spokes team behind Tim Tszyu have indicated that this might be in Tszyu's best interest. He's actually stated on many occasions that he's always wanted to travel to Argentina, and since the title was taken from the United States, he'd very much like to travel to Argentina with the intention of bringing it back. That's how title wins should work after all. But while he waits, both Jennings and George Rose of No Limit have spoken up about securing another home bout for Tszyu in the meantime. So then, what can we expect when it comes to Tszyu's future? In other words, there is one of two paths that need to be followed by Tim Tszyu at the moment. If Castaños is free for a championship bout, Tszyu will most likely be traveling to Argentina, where the boxing match will determine who is skilled enough to take the title home. But if Castaños instead chooses to bring an end to the draw between him and Charlo, Tszyu will have to find another fighter that will keep him from becoming complacent while waiting. This would after all allow him to obtain a record of 21-0 before taking on the defending champion, and could even increase his TKO total by another full knockout. When asked about what's next, Tszyu actually surprised fans by stating that he wants more 12-rounders in his life. According to the fighter, he's very much sick of all the 10-rounders he's been dealing with over the last couple of months. As such, experts have suggested that another 12-rounder before getting ringside with Castaños will probably improve Tszyu's chances of walking away with the title. So Tszyu will likely be open to the next Australian offer. And there you have it, everything you need to know about Tszyu's next move after dominating Takeshi Inoue. What did you think of the fight though? And do you have confidence in Tim Tszyu going forward? Be sure to let us know in the comments section down below.